At Thanksgiving, my own children looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't their mother anymore. But when I handed them a single letter, the room went dead silent. I need you to hear everything that happened, because what came next changed our family forever. Please stay with me as I share it. It started like any other Thanksgiving at my home in Ohio. The table was set, the turkey was in the oven, and the smell of pumpkin pie filled the air. My children, Naomi, 28, and Edward, 25, arrived with their partners, smiling and carrying dishes to share. At first, it felt like a happy gathering, laughter, hugs, and warm greetings. I was grateful to see my family together, just like I had hoped. But the warmth didn't last long. After the first few bites, Naomi suddenly frowned and said, "Mom, I don't even know why we're here. You weren't really there for us growing up." Her words cut through the cheerful atmosphere like a knife. Edward didn't hesitate to agree. "Yeah, Mom, I think it's time we admit the truth. You weren't really a mom to us. You ruined Dad's life, and honestly, we can't call you our mother anymore." I froze for a moment, unable to believe what I was hearing. My children, my own blood, telling me that after everything I had done for them, they no longer recognized me as their mother. They accused me of mistakes I hadn't made, of choices I never even had the chance to control. My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady, refusing to let my pain show too soon. Naomi's fiancé, Jason, tried to support her, nodding along as if agreeing made it easier to join in the attack. Edward's girlfriend just looked down, uncomfortable but silent. The words kept coming, each one sharper than the last, and I felt a strange mix of hurt and anger building inside me. I realized then that this was the moment I had feared, but also been waiting for. For years, I had quietly gathered documents, letters, and evidence that could finally show the truth. The truth that their father had twisted our story and poisoned their hearts against me. I had kept a letter ready, a single letter that contained everything. And now, with my children calling me a stranger at my own Thanksgiving table, it was time. With trembling hands, I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the envelope. Sliding it across the table, I looked each of them in the eye and said, "If you truly believe I am the person you say I am, then read this." The room went completely silent. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of cutlery, all of it stopped. Naomi and Edward stared at the envelope, confusion and disbelief painted across their faces. That moment was heavy, quiet, and tense. I could feel my own heartbeat in my ears, but I knew that finally, the truth had a chance to be seen. I remember those early years like they were yesterday. After Richard left, it was just me and the kids, trying to make sense of our new life. Naomi was only 6, Edward barely 3, and suddenly I was not just their mother, but their only parent. Every day was a balancing act, getting them ready for school, making sure they had what they needed, all while working long hours just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I took on 2 jobs, sometimes skipping meals myself so that Naomi and Edward could eat well. I wanted them to have what I never had: stability, opportunities, and a chance to chase their dream. I stayed up late filling out college applications, helping with homework, and saving every extra dollar I could, quietly putting aside a nest egg for their future. I thought my sacrifices would be enough, that they would see my love in every little thing I did for them. But Richard had other plans. Even from a distance, he found ways to twist our reality. He told them stories about me that weren't true, painting me as selfish or uncaring. He suggested I only thought about myself, and that I didn't care about them the way a mother should. At first, I tried to explain, to show them with my actions, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Slowly, over the years, his words took root in their hearts. It was subtle at first. Naomi would hesitate before hugging me. Edward would question why I made certain decisions. They didn't realize it, but their father was shaping their perception, turning little misunderstandings into proof that I had failed them. He made them doubt my love, my intentions, everything I had done for them. And I watched helplessly, hoping they would eventually see through it, that they would realize how much I had given up for them. Even friends and family noticed the change. People would mention how Richard seemed to have influenced the kids, and I'd quietly nod, trying not to expose the depth of my worry. I didn't want to alarm them unnecessarily, and I didn't want to fight their battles for them. They needed to come to the truth themselves. Yet every lie Richard planted, every story he told, chipped away at the bond one thought was unbreakable. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly now. He was always there, whispering doubts, twisting small events into major grievances. And the worst part was that the kids didn't question him. They trusted him, and slowly, that trust came at my expense. What I thought was their love, their certainty that I was their mother, was being eroded day by day, unnoticed until it was almost too late. All my sacrifices, all the nights I stayed awake worrying about them, all the love I poured into their lives, it seemed invisible, overshadowed by the lies they had grown up believing. And yet, I never gave up on them. I kept hoping that one day, they would understand the truth. The tension at the table grew thicker with every passing minute. Naomi pushed her plate slightly away, barely touching her food, and shot me a look filled with disdain. "You know, Mom," she said casually, "I've always wondered why you never really supported me when it mattered. I guess some people just don't have the energy to be there for their own children." Her words stung, but I held my tongue, forcing myself to breathe slowly and remain calm. Edward didn't hold back either. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and said, "I don't even know why I bother anymore. Honestly, I think it's better if we just forget about you. You've been toxic for as long as I can remember, and I don't want that in my life." His voice was steady, but the coldness in his tone cut deeper than any shout could have. I felt a pang of pain in my chest, but I stayed quiet. I knew this moment was part of the storm I had anticipated, and reacting in anger would only give them more power. Naomi's fiancé, Jason, tried to appear supportive of her words, nodding along as if to say, "Yes, she's right," he added in a casual tone. "It's hard to see someone always put themselves first, you know? It makes you wonder if they ever really cared." I stared at him, recognizing the subtle cruelty in his attempt to validate Naomi's accusations. The truth was twisted, but they all believed the story Richard had fed them for years. I watched quietly, my hands resting on my lap, my mind carefully analyzing every gesture, every smirk, every accusatory glance. Their cruelty was deliberate, practiced even, and I understood that this was the effect of years of manipulation. Still, I refused to rise to the bait. I didn't defend myself yet, because I had prepared for this moment. I had something far more powerful than words ready to speak for me. The room felt colder with each passing remark. The laughter and chatter that had once accompanied our family dinners had disappeared entirely, replaced by icy tension and sharp, deliberate words. Naomi's eyes gleamed with a mixture of anger and satisfaction, and Edward's body language screamed contempt. Even Jason's subtle smirk added fuel to the fire, as if they were all part of the same performance aimed at breaking me down. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the sting of their accusations, and the sadness that came from seeing the children I loved so dearly turn against me so openly. Yet through it all, I remained silent, observing. Every word, every glance, every slight movement was a thread I would later use. I knew that patience was my ally. Reacting impulsively would only let them believe their cruelty had succeeded. So I stayed still, calm, and watchful, letting their words hang in the air like sharp knives. I reminded myself that the right moment would come to reveal the truth, one that would leave them frozen and unable to deny the reality of what had really happened. And in that silence, I felt a quiet strength building inside me, ready to face their coldness with a power they would never see coming. For years, I had carried a quiet burden, one that no one else could see. I knew what Richard had done, not just the divorce, not just leaving us, but the way he had slowly and deliberately poisoned Naomi and Edward's hearts against me. I watched as their trust in me eroded, and though it hurt, I stayed patient. I knew that showing anger or desperation wouldn't help. The truth had to come out on my terms. I began my preparation in silence. Every document, every letter, every piece of evidence that could show the truth, I collected and organized carefully. There were bank statements proving how Richard had drained our savings, letters he had forged, and even financial records showing the lies he had spread about me being careless with money. I reached out to family friends who had witnessed his manipulation over the years, asking them to write their observations, confirming what had really happened. I kept everything meticulously filed and safe, a quiet arsenal of truth that no one could dispute. The most important piece, though, was the letter I wrote myself. It was sealed carefully and kept hidden for the right moment, a single document that contained everything: the lies, the proof, the timeline, and even Richard's own admissions from years ago. I called it my ace up the sleeve, the one thing that could finally make my children see the reality behind the stories they had been told. Writing it wasn't easy. I relived every betrayal, every lonely night, every moment I had sacrificed for them. I poured my heart into that letter, ensuring it was honest, complete, and undeniable. I had hoped for so long that Naomi and Edward would recognize the truth on their own, that they would eventually realize how Richard's words had twisted their perception of me. I stayed quiet at family gatherings, answered questions carefully, and always put my energy into loving them instead of arguing. I thought maybe one day, without confrontation, they would come back to me with open eyes. But now, sitting at my own Thanksgiving table, listening to the very children I had raised call me a stranger, the reality hit me hard. The patience I had held for so long was not enough anymore. Their cruelty, their cold words, and the disbelief in their eyes made it clear. They would not discover the truth on their own. The time had come to act. With everything prepared, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I had spent years building this moment, gathering every piece of evidence, every proof, every fact that could finally break through the wall Richard had built between us. I was no longer just a mother trying to be heard. I was a mother ready to reveal the truth, fully armed with the proof that would leave no room for doubt. It was time. Years of silent preparation, of patience, and of careful planning had led to this one moment. I knew that when the time came to present my letter, nothing could stop the truth from reaching my children, and finally, I would reclaim the respect and understanding that had been stolen from me. The air at the table was thick, almost suffocating. Naomi leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp and cold, and said the words that still echo in my mind. "You're a stranger to us, Mom. I don't know who you are anymore." Edward pushed his plate away as if it burned him to touch it, his jaw tight, his expression filled with contempt. The warmth and laughter that had greeted us at the start of the evening had vanished entirely, replaced by icy hostility. I felt my hands tremble slightly, but I forced myself to remain steady. My heart pounded in my chest, yet my eyes were calm, meeting each of theirs in turn. I had anticipated this moment, prepared for it mentally, and now the time had come. The years of careful planning, the documents and letters I had collected, and the sealed envelope I had kept hidden for this exact instant were ready. My silent patience, my composure through their cruel words, had led to this point. Slowly, I reached into my cardigan pocket and felt the envelope, its weight reassuring in my hand. It was more than paper. It was the truth, my voice in ink, my years of struggle and sacrifice laid bare in a way that could not be twisted or denied. I placed it on the table, sliding it gently across the polished wood toward them. The movement was deliberate, measured, meant to draw their attention and signal that something significant was about to be revealed. I looked at Naomi first, then Edward, and spoke in a steady voice, careful not to let my emotions betray me. "If you're so sure I was the monster, then you should read this." My words hung in the air, simple yet loaded with years of pain, disappointment, and quiet strength. I did not raise my voice. I did not plead or justify myself. I merely offered the one thing that could finally show them the truth beyond their doubts and the lies they had been fed. A silence fell over the table immediately, heavier than anything I had ever felt. The clinking of silverware had stopped. The whispers and laughter from earlier in the evening had vanished. Naomi's eyes widened slightly as she reached for the envelope, hesitating as though sensing the gravity of the moment. Edward leaned forward, hands resting on the table, his expression unreadable but tense. Even Jason and the other partners, who had been trying to support their accusations, froze in place. In that silence, I felt a calm strength settle over me. All the fear, all the hurt, all the sleepless nights and years of quiet endurance coalesced into this single moment. The letter was more than words. It was a revelation, a reckoning, a mirror showing the truth of what had really happened. The room, once warm and inviting, was now charged with tension so palpable it seemed to press against my chest, yet I remained composed. I watched them stare at the envelope, their curiosity and disbelief warring on their faces. The moment was delicate, fragile, and powerful all at once. I knew that once they opened it, the truth could no longer be denied. And in that silence, with the letter lying between us, I finally felt the shift beginning. My children's carefully constructed wall of hatred was about to meet the undeniable reality of what had really happened. Naomi didn't hesitate. She ripped open the envelope with a mix of curiosity and nervousness, the paper crinkling sharply in the quiet room. She unfolded the letter and began to read aloud, her voice trembling slightly as the words reached her lips. At first, she read slowly, almost in disbelief, but as the sentences sank in, the tension around the table grew heavier, almost unbearable. The letter started with a clear timeline, explaining how Richard had drained the college fund I had painstakingly saved for both Naomi and Edward. Each sentence laid out the steps he had taken to undermine me, from transferring money without my knowledge to forging my signature on debts that weren't mine. I had kept copies of the bank statements and legal documents, all notarized, tucked carefully in the envelope to prove every claim. Every accusation I had ever endured from them now had context, evidence that could no longer be ignored. As Naomi continued, she read aloud the details of Richard's lies about my character. He had told them I was unfaithful, careless, selfish, a mother who didn't love them, a woman they should distrust. But the letter included the proof that none of it was true. Letters, receipts, and even a personal apology Richard had written years ago, admitting to his manipulations. I had never shown it to them before, believing that one day they might discover the truth on their own. Now it was unavoidable. Edward leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of the table, eyes widening as Naomi's voice carried through each revelation. He did all this? He whispered under his breath, disbelief coloring every syllable. Naomi's fiancé Jason looked shocked, no longer smirking or trying to support her accusations, caught entirely off guard by the weight of the proof. Even Edward's girlfriend, who had been silent, now stared at the documents, unable to look away. Each piece of evidence Naomi held up, each line she read, seemed to freeze the room. Faces turned pale, mouth slightly open, and the usual hum of conversation was gone entirely. It was as though the truth itself had physically descended upon the table, pressing down on all of us. Every lie they had believed, every anger-fueled accusation they had thrown at me, now hung exposed for all to see. I watched quietly, holding back the rush of emotions I felt. Relief, vindication, and even sorrow mixed together as I observed my children confronting the reality of what had truly happened. Their eyes met mine, searching, questioning, and beginning to realize the extent of Richard's deceit. By the time Naomi finished reading, a heavy silence remained. The letter lay open on the table, proof of years of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal. No words were spoken for several moments, only the sound of shallow breaths and the faint rustle of paper. I remained calm, letting them absorb it all, knowing that the truth, finally revealed, had shattered the illusions that had kept them apart from me for so long. It was a moment I had waited for years to see, and now it was undeniable. The change was immediate. The smugness and superiority that Naomi and Edward had carried through dinner vanished the moment the truth settled in. Naomi's hands trembled as she clutched the letter, her eyes wide and unsteady. She opened her mouth, then closed it, trying to find words that could explain away years of accusations, but none came. Her carefully rehearsed anger was gone, replaced by shock and confusion. Edward, still gripping the edge of the table, shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. His face, once hard and cold, softened as disbelief took hold. Every word he had spoken moments ago, the accusations, the judgment, the cruelty, suddenly felt hollow, meaningless against the weight of the evidence before him. He looked at me, eyes searching, unsure of what to believe, yet beginning to see the truth for the first time. Jason, sensing the shift, tried to speak up, his voice hesitant. "Wait, maybe," he began, attempting to justify or clarify, to help Naomi save face. I cut him off sharply, my voice firm and unwavering. "This is between me and my children," I said. There was no room for interference, no space for his attempts to control the moment. This was mine and theirs, my chance to reveal the truth and for them to face it honestly, without distractions or excuses. Naomi finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper, shaking with emotion. I don't understand. Everything we thought, it was all lies." Her tears began to fall, small at first, then faster, leaving streaks down her cheeks. The pride she had clung to for so long, the shield she had built against me, crumbled completely. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly as the reality of her father's manipulation hit her with full force. Edward reached out, his hands hovering over the letter, trembling slightly. "Mom, we didn't know," he whispered, his voice thick with guilt and regret. The hardness in his eyes softened entirely, replaced by the raw emotion of a child finally understanding the betrayal of a parent they had trusted. He shook his head again, as if trying to erase the past, to undo the years of misunderstanding and misplaced anger. But it was too late. The truth was undeniable. The silence in the room was heavy, punctuated only by Naomi's quiet sobs and Edward's shallow breaths. They looked at me, and for the first time that evening, I saw recognition in their eyes. Not just recognition of the evidence before them, but the realization that the hatred they had carried toward me had been carefully constructed, built on lies and manipulations they had never suspected. In that moment, I didn't rush to comfort them. I let them feel the weight of their realization, the full impact of the truth. Years of manipulation had left scars, and they needed to understand the consequences of believing lies. Slowly, Naomi's crying softened, Edward's hands unclenched, and the room, once filled with anger and judgment, became a space of raw, unfiltered understanding. My children were crumbling, yes, but in that crumbling, there was also the first step toward seeing me clearly, toward recognizing the mother they had almost lost to lies. I could feel the tremor of emotion in the room, the fragile state my children had fallen into after reading the letter. Naomi's tears streaked down her face, and Edward's shoulders shook as he tried to hold back his own guilt. Yet, I didn't move closer. I didn't reach out to comfort them. This was not the time for soft words or gentle touches. Years of quiet endurance, of sacrifices unnoticed and patience tested, had brought me here, and I needed to hold my ground. "You chose to believe the worst about me without ever asking for the truth," I said, my voice steady but low, carrying the weight of years of hurt. "That's on you." The words were sharp, deliberate, and they cut through the silence like a blade. I looked each of them in the eye, not with anger, but with the cold, unwavering strength that had been forged through every lonely night and every challenge I had faced alone. Naomi sniffled, trying to compose herself, but her voice wavered as she whispered, "Mom, please, we didn't know. We were wrong." She faltered, her apology incomplete, but her guilt was clear. Edward, shaking his head, spoke next, voice thick with remorse. "Mom, we please forgive us. We never should have," he trailed off, unable to finish, the shame in his expression undeniable. I remained seated, my hands resting calmly on the table, and let them speak. I didn't rush to accept their apologies, didn't offer them immediate forgiveness. This was my moment, the one where the power shifted back to me, where my voice and my truth could stand unchallenged. Years of manipulation, of false accusations, of quiet suffering had given me this strength. I could see it reflected in their eyes now, the recognition that I was not the weak, submissive figure they had accused me of being. You have spent years believing lies and pointing fingers at me, I continued, my tone firm. I stayed silent, hoping you would see the truth for yourselves. But you didn't. Instead, you chose to attack me, to hurt me, and to call me names I don't deserve. Each word carried the weight of my sacrifices, the long nights, the constant worry, and the love that had gone unseen and unappreciated. The room remained heavy with their guilt and my controlled composure. Naomi lowered her gaze, trembling, and Edward's fists unclenched, his body slackening under the weight of realization. They were no longer in control. They had no room to argue or defend themselves. My voice, calm yet powerful, had reclaimed the authority that had been stripped away by years of manipulation. This wasn't revenge in the form of anger or retaliation. It was the quiet, unshakable power of truth. I let them feel it, let them sit in the discomfort of their own choices and disbelief. This was my strength, not loud or explosive, but cold, unwavering, and undeniable. For the first time, they understood that I was not someone to be underestimated, and that the years of pain they caused me would not be dismissed lightly. I was strong, and finally they saw it. The room stayed quiet long after the letter had been read. The clinking of cutlery, the casual chatter, the laughter that usually accompanied our meals, it all disappeared. Jason and Edward's girlfriend exchanged uncomfortable glances, both sensing that their presence was no longer welcome. They gathered their things slowly, avoiding eye contact, and left the house without a word. Their exit left a heavy emptiness at the table, an almost tangible tension hanging in the air. Naomi and Edward stayed behind, their faces pale and expressions filled with shame. The weight of realization pressed down on them, and they both seemed smaller somehow, humbled by the undeniable truth they had just absorbed. Naomi fidgeted with her napkin, avoiding my gaze for a moment before finally looking up, her eyes wet and uncertain. Edward stood slightly behind her, hesitant, as though unsure if he had the right to even remain in the room. I'm so sorry, Mom, Naomi whispered, voice trembling. We shouldn't have said those things. We didn't know the truth, and we were wrong to attack you like that. Her words were genuine, full of regret, but I remained seated, letting the weight of her apology settle without immediately offering forgiveness. Edward stepped closer, his voice quieter but firm with sincerity. Mom, I can't believe we let ourselves be fooled for so long. We owe you so much, and we're sorry for everything. Please, can you forgive us? He looked at me with an intensity one hadn't seen in years, as if begging not just for forgiveness, but for the chance to rebuild what they had destroyed with their assumptions and anger. I didn't rush to comfort them. I didn't hug them or offer easy reassurance. Instead, I held their gaze and said firmly, rebuilding trust isn't something that happens overnight. It will take time, and I'm not promising it will be easy or guaranteed. You need to understand that my trust, my love, and my respect aren't things to be taken for granted or assumed back automatically. Their eyes widened slightly at my words, the seriousness of my stance sinking in. They had spent so long believing I would always be there, always forgive, always accommodate their mistakes. But now, confronted with the truth and my unwavering resolve, they realized how wrong they had been. For the first time, Naomi and Edward understood that their mother was not weak. I wasn't someone who could be manipulated or taken for granted. I was someone strong enough to endure betrayal, strong enough to stay silent for years, and strong enough to walk away if necessary. They stood there, humbled and remorseful, trying to piece together the steps they needed to take to earn back my trust. I could see their shame, their discomfort, and their dawning understanding of the mother they had nearly lost to lies and manipulation. It was a quiet, heavy moment, but in that quiet, a shift had occurred. My children were beginning to recognize not only the truth about their father's deceit, but also the strength I had carried through every challenge. The path to forgiveness would be long, but the first step, seeing me as the mother I truly was, had finally been taken. The house felt emptier than it ever had as I began clearing the table. Plates, glasses, and napkins lay scattered, remnants of a dinner that had turned into something far heavier than turkey and pie. Jason and the others had gone, slipping out quietly, leaving only Naomi and Edward behind for a few moments of awkward, humbling silence. Now the quiet lingered in every corner, pressing gently against the walls, giving the house a weight it hadn't carried before. I moved deliberately, stacking plates, wiping crumbs, and putting away utensils. My movements were slow but steady, each action deliberate, as if the rhythm of cleaning could help me process everything that had just unfolded. I wasn't smiling, and I didn't feel triumphant in the way stories often promise. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet strength settling into me, a kind of satisfaction that had nothing to do with anger or vindictive. It was the calm that comes from finally having your voice heard and your truth recognized, a weight lifted from your shoulders after years of carrying it alone. I paused for a moment and looked around the empty dining room. The silence was almost reverent, a stark contrast to the cruel accusations and disbelief that had filled the air just an hour ago. The children's confusion, their guilt, their shock, it was all still fresh, lingering like a shadow over the polished table. I didn't feel joy in their discomfort. My revenge wasn't about hurting them or proving dominance. It was about making them face reality, about ensuring that the lies they had believed for years could no longer shape their perception of me. As I straightened the chairs and wiped down the last crumbs of food, I thought about the years of sacrifices, the nights spent working 2 jobs, the quiet patience I had maintained while Richard manipulated their minds and hearts. All of it had led to this moment, and finally the truth was undeniable. Naomi and Edward had seen it, absorbed it, and the realization of what had been done to me had reached them. They were humbled, ashamed, and forced to reckon with their own choices. That was my revenge, not loud, not vengeful, but precise and unshakable. I stacked the final dishes, set them aside, and took a deep breath. The room was clean now, the remnants of the tense evening gone, but the impact of what had happened lingered in every corner. I felt lighter somehow, not because I had proven a point, but because the truth had finally been spoken and could no longer be ignored. For years, I had been quiet, enduring the pain silently, waiting for the right moment to act. Now that moment had come, and I had delivered it with all the care, patience, and clarity I could muster. That night, my children disowned me. But with one letter, I reminded them exactly who their mother really was. I didn't need anger, confrontation, or punishment to make my point. The truth itself was enough. And in that quiet, empty dining room, I felt the full measure of my strength and the unshakable certainty that my voice, my love, and my sacrifices could never again be dismissed. What do you think about Diana's choice to stand her ground instead of forgiving her kids right away? Would you have acted the same way, or given in sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your take. And if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one.